I'm Samantha Upton. I'm the president of the Tredegar Society, and we'd all like to welcome you here tonight. We have an exciting performance here, and it's going to be very informative. The first thing I'd like to address is thanking Hutton and Williams. Hutton and Williams is the sponsor of this Foundry series and makes it all possible through their generous donation. We have with us here tonight the Tredegar Brass Band. For the past 9 years, they have been entertaining and informing thousands across Central Virginia. They're based in Richmond. This small group is composed of 2 cornets, a euphonium, a tuba, and a side drummer. Vocals are brought to you by a folklorist and classically trained singer, Mr. Joshua Allen. Tonight's program will include information on the life of a military musician as well as demonstrations of period instruments. Give them a hand and let's get started.
Hello and welcome, finally, everybody. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful fall evening in Virginia. We are the Tredegar Brass Band, and we're finally all here from all different parts of Central Virginia, and we're here to perform for you. We started out here about 8 years ago. I guess it's going on 9 now. That we started here at Richmond Civil War Day, and we were hired by the National Park Service and by the museum here to put on some music. We realized there wasn't any music being presented in Central Virginia about the Civil War. So we've been at it ever since, and we have a lot of fun with it. Now, one thing I will tell you is we are not historians, we are not writers, we're not scholars, we are musicians. Musicians who grew up or moved to this area and fell in love with the history of Virginia and of Richmond, and so especially the Civil War history. And so that's how we approach our program. And all we ask of you is to set aside any thoughts of today, set aside any preconceived ideas you may have had about music or music of the Civil War, what I'd like you to do is to kind of see with your ears, listen, shut your eyes, listen to the music. Try to transport yourself back to a very different time in this country. At the start of the Civil War, the brass band had only been in America for about 20 years. It was a fairly new phenomenon. And most people that fought in the Civil War, most young men, lived on farms. And of course, their version of music was vastly different than what the people heard in Boston and in New York. For a farm boy, it might just be the sound of wind in the trees, birds singing, maybe a voice singing in church. Or if they were lucky enough, they might have a piano in church. But they wouldn't have heard one of these or seen one of these instruments, a brass instrument. It was a very special thing, a very exciting thing for people to hear a brass band in those days. When Lincoln ordered 75,000 volunteers at the start of the war to serve for 9 months, at the same time he made that order, that first year, 28,000 musicians volunteered for service with the Union Army. They had 618 bands, one musician for every 41 infantrymen. It cost the U.S. government $4 million that first year, if you can believe that. I guess everybody who could find an instrument grabbed onto one and figured, I'm going to go to war with the horn. I don't know, but they sure came out of the woodwork. Very interesting time back then, very sentimental music. The music we played for you just now was called Murdoch's Quickstep. Quite frequently, music that was popular at the time was transformed into marches or quick steps for the soldiers. At that time, it was common to take Stephen Foster music, for example, which is still well known today, and turn it into a march or what they call a quick step. So let's continue on here a little bit and play another one for you. At the time of the Civil War, we had two national anthems. The Union had two national anthems. They had, of course, the one Star Spangled Banner, which we're all familiar with, but they also had another one called Hail Columbia. And Hail Columbia was a tune that was written for George Washington's inauguration. And so both of these tunes would have been very familiar to Americans at that time. No need to stand up, but we're going to play Hail Columbia for you. this was really the start of true American music. It happened right around the Civil War period. America had been playing a lot of the music from Europe at that time. Of course, people were listening to operas and that sort of thing. And then as music became more popular, and again, I mentioned Stephen Foster as one example, people began turning towards brass band music, which became extremely popular and lasted probably for 50 years, maybe 80 years, well into, at the time of World War I, brass bands were still very popular. At that time of the Civil War, every gentleman was expected to sing. You weren't a true man unless you could carry a tune. And if you were expected at a party to stand up and sing, you better deliver. So a lot of these musicians that hired on in the Civil War, either they were trained by their parents who had come from Europe, or they were pretty good singers, and so they were able to pick up the instrument fairly quickly. In the Civil War, there were two types of musicians. There were bandsmen, which were musicians who could read music, and there were field musicians. And the field musicians were the folks that played by rote. In other words, they just mimicked what they heard their mentor play. So buglers, drummers, and fifers were field musicians, and musicians that read written music were called bandsmen. Usually within a regiment, which would be about 1,000 men, there would be a band, and the band would be authorized strength was about 25 people. And there would be a sergeant in charge of that band called the principal musician, and he wrote the music for everyone to read and play. The musician would keep that music in a little notebook, a small notebook that could fit in your pocket, and it was usually written in ink. And they took care of that, because if they lost it, they would be holding a rifle. Just like if they lost the mouthpiece on their horn, they'd be holding a rifle. So I'm going to show you some instruments here from back in that time. This is a cornet that was built in 1864 in New York. It was made from one sheet of brass by hand, without any electricity, obviously. It's an incredible instrument, extremely lightweight, very thin brass. It was very, very difficult for Southern musicians to get these instruments. They weren't manufactured in the Southern United States. The primary manufacturing point was Boston and the central Massachusetts area. There were some instruments that were imported from Europe, but they were difficult for a Southern musician to get. So as I mentioned, when the war started out and Congress had to pay $4 million for those soldiers, the next year they got rid of the bands. They got rid of 90% of them. So the South really never could afford to have bands. They had a couple of very good bands, but mostly they couldn't afford them, and they also couldn't come by the music, so the music or the instruments. When they did, they were usually from bandsmen that were made prisoner, and they would take their instruments and take their music. So this instrument, what I love about this instrument is this instrument was actually in the war. It was carried by a musician who volunteered for a Kansas regiment, and it traveled through the Battle of Chickamauga and all up the Tennessee Valley campaign. And it amazes me how well it was taken care of when you consider what hard lives they had. This was this man's lifeline. What I love about the instrument is we all wonder what Abe Lincoln may have sounded like, or Stonewall Jackson, or Robert E. Lee. What were their voices? Well, this is a voice from then. This is the same voice that the soldiers heard right back then. Has not changed. So I'm going to play a little song for you. It's called Lorena. It's a tune that a legend has it that it was banned in some regiments in the South because it made people too homesick. But One thing I'll mention about this instrument, it's very different from a modern instrument. Back then, the 19th century, the idea was to create an instrument that sounded like the human voice. The human voice was what everyone was seeking. Whether you were a violin player or a brass player, you were trying to imitate the human voice. That was perfection. So you will notice that this instrument does not sound like a modern trumpet or a modern cornet that I was just playing. But it has its own sound, very lyrical, sentimental sound. Another instrument I'd like to show you is the bugle. The bugle, I often get asked to play requests on this. Do you know anything by John Denver? You know, those kind of things. Stairway to Heaven, you know, all that. Some Tower of Power, right? So, but anyway, the instrument, as you notice, it has no holes on it, no keys, no slide, like a trombone. It plays 7 notes. That's all it is. It's the true name of the instrument is a signal horn. It's meant for battle. It's meant for sending commands at a very far distance. So I'm going to unleash this thing. I'm going to shoot it over your heads, I hope. And I'm going to put a mouthpiece in it. I'm going to do it with or without a mouthpiece. It's going to happen. You'll notice how this is such a red color. Bugles were made, a lot of times they were made with a lot of copper in them. And copper is much more resonant than just standard brass. So the idea was to get a sound and project it as far as you could. So, has everyone heard the charge? Anyone? Yeah, okay. How many people have watched a hockey game? Okay, so I'm going to play the charge, but I'm going to play the charge from 1865. Shoot for? Maybe that Tredegar sign out there? That's bridge? The bridge.
Bridge.
Yeah.
Not one that's lights
You
out.
might want to move it. Take it to the bridge. So the instrument can carry darn near a mile on a quiet day. The only problem with this instrument was everybody was using the same bugle calls. So when the battle started, you had complete chaos. And you probably had 3 or 4 buglers. You had one master bugler who was with the commanding officer. He'd receive the order verbally, he'd sound the call, and then it would carry out through the ranks, including people would be passing it, sergeants would be passing it verbally. But if you can imagine sound of horses and shot and explosions and all these things going off, it was complete chaos. One of the things, though, I've read is that because these were given to small boys, now, how many of you have been to a middle school band concert, a first one? Okay, okay, so these were given to kids that were too small to carry a rifle. So they said, okay, you're our bugler, start bugling. And they were horrible. They really sounded bad. So, but one thing is that the regiment came to identify that sound of that particular bugler just by their mistakes and their imperfections in their tone. Even though they were playing essentially the same calls, they could go, oh, that's our guy. Yeah. So anyway, a very interesting instrument. This instrument was built in 1870. Tom, you've got something you can show them as well, don't you?
Sure. This is another example. This is a cavalry bugle, very short, because when you're riding a horse at full gallop, it was hard to hold a bugle and ride at the same time. So you had to have some, I don't think so, you can all hear me.
Shut up.
You had to have something you could hold close to your mouth and ride a horse at the same time. This is all brass. It's very heavy. My pride and joy I've had for several years now. This is more story than just music. When I acquired this bugle, it was in 2 pieces, 3 pieces with the mouthpiece, completely smashed flat. And it had a story to go by it. A family that gave it to me, their ancestor was a Confederate bugler stationed here in Richmond. And on that ill-fated day in 1865, when the Yankees were coming ashore, Richmond was aflame, he was given the order to blow assembly to call the troops together to evacuate Richmond and march to Danville. And he did as ordered. He blew assembly, the troops gathered, and as they were marching to Danville, he made the statement, he said, "The war is over, all is lost. I never want to hear a bugle again. I'm going home." And he threw it on the ground and stomped it. His wife, who was there with him since he was stationed here in Richmond, she picked up the pieces, remembered what he said, wrote it down. That became part of the family legacy. And it was given to me several years ago. As long as I didn't mention the name of the family, because actually he went AWOL, even though the war was pretty much over. They didn't want to admit that their great-great-great-grandfather had gone AWOL towards the end of the war and just walked home. I had no idea it could ever come looking like this. A friend of mine, a master instrument repairman, redid this. It took him about 2 years to actually make it like a bugle again. And pretty melancholy when you're there. If you were a Confederate, your city's in flames, and nothing is working right. So I thought I'd keep the melancholy tone here, and this is a call they heard all too often.
Well, we played the Union national anthem, and now we're going to play what would have been as close as you can get to the national anthem of the Confederacy. This is a medley of 2 songs. First one is the Bonnie Blue Flag, and the second song is Dixie. You know, when I asked for that arrangement from a guy here in town, I said, hey, can you put these two tunes together for me? He goes, Dixie? Oh, you can't play Dixie in Richmond. No, it's politically incorrect, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know, funny thing, I started researching the actual tune, and it turns out that the song was used as the campaign song for Abraham Lincoln, of all people, at the first Republican convention. And it was Lincoln's favorite song, and it was a favorite song all across the country. Both band books played that song. In fact, the music we're playing today, with the exception of Hail Columbia, a lot of it was in the Confederate band book as well as the Union band book. Let's see how we're doing on time. Oh yeah, you know what? I forgot to do this. It's time for me to introduce the band. Guys, can
Yeah, sure. I'm Roger.
I'm Tom.
all right, that's done. Okay. Okay, what we're going to do next is let's see, we'll keep an eye on the time here. I can't believe how much talking I've been doing. I want to introduce someone special to you, special to all of us, a fellow by the name of Joshua Allen. Joshua is a longtime Richmond resident, originally from North Carolina, and he's a folklorist, and he knows quite a bit about the songs of the slaves. And when we present our program, we want to present music of the North and the South, and 4 million other people whose music was not represented at that time. And so working with Josh now, he's helping us understand that music. I think you're going to find it very, very interesting. You've heard how the European influence was on inside American music. You've heard, even in the bugle calls for charge, this happy little dance to charge into a cannon. Well, now you hear music from people in a different world. So, will you please welcome Mr. Joshua Allen.
First, I'd just like to say good evening to everyone. And the instruments you'll hear me play today are all handmade by myself. This is one of the oldest instruments known to man, made from a goat horn. How many people here went to see the movie Free State of Jones? Well, between the late 1863 and mid 1864, a band of Confederate deserters battled Confederate cavalry in the Piney Woods regions of Jones County, Mississippi, calling themselves the Knights after the Captain Knight Newton Knight. They set up headquarters in the swamps of the Leaf River, where they declared their loyalty to the U.S. government. Although they got little help from the Union, they managed to hold out until the end of the war. This was a theme song to the movie Free State of Jones, I'm Crying. I'm crying for the mother who lost her only son. Barely 16 years of age and forced to carry a gun across the bloody battlefield of another rising sun. I'm crying for the mother who lost her only son. I'm crying for the father who lost his baby child. Mankind came and carried him off to work in his cotton fields. If you don't mind me, boy, Lord, I'll whip your little black hide. I'm crying for the father who lost his baby child. I'm crying for the sister who lost her loving man. Ku Klux Klan came in the night and hung him from a limb. Lord, we couldn't see their faces, but I knew it was them. I'm crying for the sister who lost her loving man. I'm crying for the brother who couldn't see the light. Burned down the cornfields and stole all our livestock. Then we joined up in a rich man's war when we knew it was a poor man's fight. I'm crying for the brother who couldn't see the light. I'm crying for the mother who lost her only son. I'm crying for the father who lost his baby child. I'm crying for the sister who lost her loving man. I'm crying for the brother who couldn't see the light. I'm crying for the mother. I'm crying for the father. I'm crying for the sister. I'm crying for the brother. I'm crying for this world who couldn't see the light. How many know the story of Joshua at the Battle of Jericho? Well, they said that Joshua strode around Jericho 7 days and 7 nights. He blew what was known as a ram's horn. This horn was probably one of the first horns that I made with my grandfather. And so I'm going to do a ram's horn call, and we're not going to blow too hard because the building will fall. But we'll see what happens with the old Negro spiritual, Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. Good evening, Sister Mary. How to do there, Brother John? Well, I just want to talk to you and tell you about who came along. Well, I know you heard about Joshua. He was the son of Nun. He never would quit his work, I'm told, until the job was done. Well, they tell me, great God, that Joshua's spear was, well, now 12 feet long, and on his hip was a double-edged sword, and his mouth was a gospel horn. Yet brave and bold he stood, salvation in his heart. Go blow that ram horn, that Joshua cried, 'cause the battle lamb in my hand. You may talk about your man of Gideon, you may brag about your king of Saul, but there's none like old Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. Up to them walls of Jericho he marched with the spear in the hand. Go below that ram horn, that Joshua cried, 'cause the battle lamb in my hand. Then the ram lamb sheep horn began to blow, the trumpet began to sound. Joshua shouted, "Glory, hallelujah," and the walls come tumbling down. That morning Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. This old spiritual is a favorite of Andy's and mine. It's called Deep River. My grandmother used to sing it to me and set me on her knee, and she would just cry. So this is a very beautiful piece of music. Hope you like my version of it. Deep river, Lord, my home is over Jordan.
want to cross over into campground. Oh, don't you want to go to that gospel feast, that promised land, where all is so peaceful, oh, deep river, Lord. I want to cross over into campground.
I think we'll wrap up this evening. We want to thank you again for coming out. We've just kind of thrown a smattering of what we do here at you, just to kind of give you a flavor, something different for a fall evening. Joshua has one more tune I'd like him to do. Can you do one more, Joshua? Yeah, I think you can. Since we're all interested in the Civil War, since we're interested in the soldiers and the families of those Americans, and all the people involved in that conflict, I think there's a song, an appropriate song that we could turn to now, and Joshua can deliver it for us, that sums up the devotion to duty of all who have served in America. Joshua?
Fallen soldiers, let us sing, where no rockets fly and no bullets wing. To our broken brothers, let us bring to the mansions of the Lord. No more dying, no more fight, no prayers pleading through the night, just divine embrace and eternal light in the mansion of the Lord. guard and keep, though the angels sleep, and through the ages may we keep the mansions of the Lord. Lay me down in the cold, cold ground, where before many men have gone. When they come, I will stand my ground, not be afraid. Thoughts of home take away my fears, sweat and blood hide my veil of tears. Once a year, say a prayer for me. Close your eyes and remember me.
Thank you all at the Tredegar Society for inviting us out here this pretty evening. We have run out of light, and we didn't bring candles. So I think our program's over. Drive safely, and thank you again for inviting us. Thank you so much.